And the reviews for this episode start with a band mentioned earlier. It's the return of Alexisonfire. Their album is called Otherness. It's their first in 13 years. You kind of touched on something earlier, which is the Alexisonfire hiatus and how long they were away probably feels longer than it actually was because of, I guess, how long in the making this album has been. They were officially gone for like just 5 years or something.
I think their last shows were like 2012. Like,
right,
and they were back in...
Not very long at all.
It's because the reunion was quite stop-start, where there was like some shows and then a big gap until they did anything long-term. Like.
Yeah, but the trickle of new music has been protracted as well. We got our first new song with tracks like Familiar Drugs back in, was that 2018 or 2019?
It was late 2018, yeah, I think.
And then, a global pandemic later, we finally have a new record where, perhaps appropriately, does not feature those songs in the track list. Sam, you did see Alexisonfire this weekend, so if you weren't already gagging for this record, this week in particular, you must be pretty fired up about it.
Yeah, this is like... I have just been in like an Alexisonfire-induced haze a little bit this week because of the live show and this record. We'll get into the record more, but this is possibly my most anticipated album this year.
Right,
like,
big then.
I've been waiting for this album a long time. Like,
yeah,
really.
Well, again, just for anyone who is sort of not, kind of a fan on the level that you are, why is a new Alexisonfire album, like returning after that amount of time, a big deal and something that you would be anticipating so heavily?
Well, they just kind of like nailed down what the kind of screamed bit there with a clean vocal singer chorus post-hardcore should be. They really, in like the mid-noughties, essentially perfected that formula, and every band who started doing that afterwards was just doing lesser versions of Alexisonfire. But they were doing really interesting, and it wasn't just the kind of like basic kind of post-hardcore. They were a band who would lean into the post side quite a bit, not as far as they'll go on this album and stuff, but it was they were just I love post-hardcore, and they were just they just nailed what that should sound like for me.
I've got a lot of admiration for Alexisonfire. I was never an active fan when they were around. I was the person who, reading Metal Hammer when Wade was announced as new singer with Gallows. I had no idea who that was, but I've very much come to recognise them as one of the best bands of their kind, and particularly revisiting records like Crisis and Young
Watch
Cardinals.
All that would be fair. Watch Out, Crisis, Young Cardinals is like just a killer trio of records.
And that's 75% of their discography at this point. But when you go back and listen to Naughty's post-hardcore albums, I think a lot of the time, those classics from like 2002, 2003 really, really fucking sound it. Alexis's best records haven't aged in the same way. And so I think that in itself puts them in a better position of being able to kind of seamlessly come back and pick up from where they left off more than, at the drive-in or Thrice. Like, while their comeback has been very successful, they almost necessarily had to sound quite different to what they used to, because, the illusion of safety or whatever, it doesn't quite, it doesn't sound, 2020 or whatever in the same way.
Yeah, you're right. That is so of that early Naughty sound. And when Thrice came back, they kind of then went, well, we're just going to do kind of big emotional melodic rock at this point.
Yeah, but I was listening to Young Cardinals the other week, and it doesn't sound like from a bygone era. It's just a big
raw, rowdy kind of hardcore almost, but with a big chorus.
Yeah, I mean, and we are doing this a couple weeks ahead of the release date, so we might be one of the first reviews out there for this. We are yet to see how this record is going to be received, but I have seen in general very little negativity around Alexisonfire's return, whether it is the singles they put out or the live shows, like you were saying. So, a new album, Otherness. For you, have they stuck the successful comeback album after all this time?
For me, absolutely. This is a really interesting album for me, because this is not necessarily the Alexisonfire. This doesn't sound like Alexisonfire of 13 years ago when Old Crows came out. This is a more aged, a more mature Alexisonfire, but this is exactly what I feel they should sound like releasing an album at this stage in 2022.
Yeah, I think it's a very impressive thing to listen to, even if it does fall into one of my least favourite genres of album cover, just smeared, ugly makeup face. But this is so much more, I guess, patient and kind of involved.
So yeah, like, and the thing is, like I said, they've always had that. They've always had those songs, but they've kind of been like the odd song or two on a record that is like loads of fist pumping rages. This is way more in the patient, in the post side of things.
Yeah,
right?
and I think if you were worried that, Alexisonfire would just kind of come back and sleepwalk it, like, this record it's immediately striking, but it is rewarding of patience. And what I was saying about, in particular, the last two Alexis albums, in how I think they were able to take the post-hardcore sound of those 80s that you had on some of the noughties that you had something on, like, Illusion of Safety by Thrice or whatever, and they turned it into records that just hold up as like just big rock albums. This album is like just as high fidelity as those, and it's not lacking for, like, anthemic moments, but the scope is a lot wider and it's more ambitious than the ambition prior was, let's make these songs sound like they could sound good in hockey stadiums or whatever. Now there's a bit of a kind of a wider feel to it, and there is a real, they are able to kind of do this slow burn pace to their songs quite a lot of the time, but in a way that is, it paints these pictures for you in a really strong way. You look at the kind of the laid back groove of something like Sweet Dreams of Otherness, and how those big booming guitar parts, the kind of woozy interplay of the various vocalists, it's clearly not the work of like a young hyperactive punk band, but it's instead quite evocative.
Yeah, no, it really is. Like, it is way, like, you're right in that it's such a broader scope, and it feels like a band who are really comfortable in kind of like bouncing off each other, and like George tends to really step back a lot more on this record, and Dallas is given much more kind of vocal control, but it feels like they're really comfortable doing that and letting George come in where he is going to be the most impactful. And you get, like, on Sweet Dreams of Otherness, where you get a lot of the trade-off between them, and like that pre-chorus where George comes in and it kind of like gets a bit rowdier, and then Dallas can then burst through with that big chorus hook, and it just feels like they're so much more like comfortable in stepping back when they need to, and like loosening up everything and letting those, like, when they'll let like the riffs really ring out, and it's not in any like urgency to be anywhere.
It feels like a very fluid kind of writing process. Well, when like bands get back together and they all do the same line of like, oh, we all just like, we got back together in, such and such member's garage, and kind of we got back to the roots of what
like
we were doing.
Old time.
Yeah. Like this, you can actually sort of imagine that being true. Like, just in terms of like getting together in a room and something organically coming out. And it does often come out in quite, gradual forms. The first real, like, kick on the album is Conditional Love, which is track 4. And that's not really necessarily in terms of speed. It's more like turning up the amps and roaring at you. And that song, when you do just get, Alexis just laying into something like that with, Wade and George howling off of each other, that, like, I want to spill some blood, like, just fundamentally rocks when they do it.
Yeah. I mean, you get like the opener that has that opens with this big like chugging guitar riff, but even then it is quite like slower, but you just get the dun 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 that like just this thumping guitar riff, and so it feels like really distinctly like Alexisonfire in that way, but it's just they don't roar out of the gates in how they would with a song like Young Cardinals or something. You're right, it takes a little while to really hit you with some aggression, but in doing that they just sound really rewarding, where you can go along and you can just vibe with this record and go on the journey with them. And then when you get hit with those blasts of energy and attack, it just like hits you in the gut. You go, yeah, fucking go for it.
Yeah, I mean, that first song you mentioned with the kind of juddering bass line, like, it kind of calls back to, the original post-hardcore ideas of, like, the Fugazis of the world and stuff like that. But there is something about Alexisonfire's, like, lush personality, whether it is, Dallas, whether it is Wade's kind of huskiness, like, all of those things can make something like that, like, which side are you on in that song, just feel, dynamic. And there is still this atmospheric element where, Sweet Dreams of Otherness was like the lead single, right? And that has the kind of production elements that make it almost feel like sort of psychedelic and widescreen. And there's bits of like, I
love like the production of this album, of how it sounds like, can sound really lo-fi and fuzzy and dingy, but super like high clarity at the same time. It's a really like impressive production job of sounding like it's kind of a plug in and play record, but having a lot going on at the same time.
Yeah, there's bits of like synths and stuff like that. I mean, Survivor's Guilt starts off well spaceship.
Yeah. They actually have a guy on stage as well doing all the keys now. That's one thing I forgot to mention. About
is he a new member since they've?
Yeah, so he's not officially like a member, but they have someone on stage,
least, right?
Yeah, so that feels like all the keys and stuff on this probably like have fed organically into bringing that into the live show as well. But yeah, like I quite like how you've got a lot of the keys. Sun Soleil is another one that has like really nice like lush waves of synth on it. Like
that's more almost like a dream pop tune, and tonally that reminded me of when kind of like Greg Puciato kind of does that kind of stuff, like post Dillinger. It's got fucking chimes after like the opening riff, but like the vocal.
It's quite City and Colour-esque, like less kind of on the acoustic side, but more like lush sort of textures with Dallas doing that just really soft croon.
Yeah, well, I mean, just about to say the harmonies in that song, kind of, the where you end, I begin vocal, like it's Dallas fucking just bodies that track in terms of, the vocal layering and stuff. Like on the last track, he even reminded me a little bit of Einar from Leprous at one point.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's one of the best vocalists in like noughties post-hardcore. Like everyone has tried to rip off his vocals. Like
but there is this kind of like haunted huskiness to Alexisonfire that really, it appeals to me out of kind of the bands in their sector, where it's never whiny. Like, instead, it's kind of, obviously Dallas has a real a fullness to his voice, and he is the cleanest singer in the band. And on the other end, you've obviously got, it's kind of gruff and doomy and bluesy when it goes down tempo, which you get on something like Blue Spade on this. I remember when we did the album club on Vesu by Thrice, and I was like, here's a post-hardcore band, but I really responded to the bits of it that reminded me of Neurosis. Like, Alexisonfire have a kind of grit to them that is beyond.
Like a Dark Night of the Soul is like a really good example of that, where like you got Dallas doing like almost like full like gospel kind of like singer. It's like so bluesy. But then when George starts going in and you've got Wade in there too, it's got so much grit to it. And I think that's what like this really cool thing is like when George is screaming, he's like he's got a mouthful of like gravel in him. Like
and you've got songs that kind of glide on kind of like a dark doom tempo for like 5 minutes or so. That will then that will go into a 6-minute song, which are nowhere to be found on Alexis records of old. It feels, I mean, obviously like Wade just did that record of kind of more stripped back stuff in general, but this has some of the mood of that, but with full band Alexisonfire setup where they can all reach further in these kind of different directions as a group of creatives, and that's all before the massive fucking closing song as well. But like you said, big, kind of progressive guitar lifts off at time. You mentioned Dark Night of the Soul, which has that kind of like spiritual communion feel. Do you think there are any points where it gets at all bogged down in any kind of like more vibey material? Like I was quite taken aback upon getting through to tracks like 7 and 8, how almost like continually spaced out it is as an album.
Like I can see how someone might think that. For me, like I've ordered the vinyl for this, and this is an album I'm going to listen to on vinyl loads because I will stick it on, and I just found myself getting in the mood and just getting like sucked into it and just kind of living in this like earthy, raw, like rough and ready, like post-hardcore journey. And so like when you then get to the one like Reverse the Curse, when that hits in, and so you get this like real punch of aggression late in the album, I'm like, oh yeah, let's fucking go right at the end. Before that then goes into World Stop Suddenly at the end, like the closing track, and so like it has those moments where like you do sit in one slower pace for a long time, but when it punches through, it's more exciting as a result.
Yeah, like I wasn't necessarily implying that it would. I think obviously some fans might take a few listens, but like it's certainly, you even still get the rewarding level of choruses that you like. Something like Reverse the Curse slips in really nicely, and that last song is really fucking good as well, with the level of kind of grace and lift that's involved with Dallas soaring, the other two guys just wailing, all against that like soulful massive extended guitar lead that it goes out on.
That extended outro, I was kind of just like, oh fuck yeah, like I've wanted Alexisonfire to do something.
It was awesome.
Really lean into that, and then like that to me is like really exciting for what the future of Alexisonfire can hold, where they can continue building on this sound they've really like, because this is, like I say, this is quite a substantial leap from where they were in terms of just like what the core ideas of it are. Even if you've still got the base elements of what Alexisonfire is with the sing, scream, trade off and all that, it's approaching it in a really different way that just it sounds exciting and it sounds authentic. It just sounds so much more. This sounds so much more believable for the band than if they tried to do Crisis again.
Yeah, well, I mean, but before that band imploded, we used to talk about how a band like Every Time I Die could kind of feasibly age from the direction of the records they were going, where they could become this more kind of like laid back, bluesy, slightly more dynamic kind of band if they chose to. And listening to this, getting obviously the first Alexisonfire record in 13 years, like, do you hear kind of that kind of a possibility in a band like Alexisonfire for that kind of like this providing some kind of roadmap?
Yeah, I totally do. I think this is really just nailed down how a band can do this and sound not abandon and betray their roots, but just grow their sound to be like, they're older dudes now. They're not like the younger like guys in their 20s, whatever, who were writing Watch Out and getting like fired up. So you can't, like, we always say like bands lose pace, but this feels like them doing it like in a way that feels graceful, feels natural, and just it feels true to them.
Well, to me, it sounds like, obviously, when you are a band, you are returning after a hiatus like this, and you're not just churning out something because you got a big offer.
The nostalgia sort of payday.
Yeah, like it's looking for a reason to play together again. Like, what more can be mined out of this that we didn't already do first time around? And to me, it sounds like, obviously they've managed to they keep it Alexisonfire, but it's not just playing into straight ahead post-hardcore sing-alongs because they have to and people expect it from them. It sounds like they have tapped into these kind of exciting avenues for them, these reasons to keep it creatively fruitful for them. And again, looking at just some of the other bands who have sort of done similar returns and stuff like that, when Thrice came back with that first record, they were able to make these kind of like lived in husky radio rock songs, and then the next couple of kind of Thrice records, they kind of turn that into some like more spacier progressive material. Alexisonfire have kind of done both on like their first album back.
I mean, I think it's like they've all obviously like the members of Alexisonfire have all been like super creative, a lot of them, in the time between the bands, and I mean, you can feel elements of like some of those projects, like the Doomchild thing that Wade's done, and See in Colour and all that. Like, you've got bits of that, so it feels like they've taken everything they've learned in the time since the last album and applied that to Alexisonfire at the same time.
Yeah, like it's not Crisis or Young Cardinals, but if you want an Alexisonfire that sounds like they are 13 years more mature than the last time they were around, I think you'll be pleased.
Yeah, I mean, I am like so into this record, and I feel like it's another one where as I live with it more and really just continue to immerse myself in these songs, I'm going to be loving it even more each time. Yeah,
well, so then if you were saying this is was possibly your most anticipated record of the year, whatever, do you think it's going to turn out to be one of your favourites of the year?
Like right now, I would say yeah. We'll see. We'll see. There's still half a year to go, but this is everything I like. I would say I would have taken them doing a nostalgia throwback. We're gonna do the old Alexisonfire thing. I'd have been like fine with that because I like that sound. But I feel much more fulfilled with them being true to themselves and releasing an album that is far more interesting.
Yeah, I think it's one of the more respect-worthy kind of returns from a band in this kind of world that I think we've had in like the last I don't know, 5-10 years or so. So yeah, really cool stuff from Alexisonfire. Otherness